Welcome to Charity Therapy, a podcast from Birkin Law about building better nonprofits. I'm your host, Jess Birkin. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Charity Therapy. Today, I am joined by my good friend, Amy Arcand. I've worked with Amy over the years for nonprofits and have gotten themselves into some messy situations, because that's when people call a lawyer, and she always helps them get out of it. Amy is the owner of Willow Consulting and focuses on nonprofit interim management and community engagement. Amy, thanks so much for being on the pod.
Hi, Jess. Thanks for having me.
So, Amy, I wanted to have you on again because no matter the size of your organization or your mission, pretty much every nonprofit will experience some kind of period of transition or growth at some point, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, for good or bad, right?
Right.
So to kick us off, what's one piece of advice that you wish you could give every nonprofit going through a major leadership transition? Whether it's a founder retiring or a firing, what's the one nugget you wish you could tell people?
Well, my first thing is always gather your passwords, gather your information, make sure that you have access to all of your systems, whether that is your bank account or your website, your email newsletters, things like that, your email system. First and foremost, just make sure you can access all of the things that you need to access.
I love that. That's like a super nuts and bolts tactic that people forget about all the time, as we are well aware.
Yeah, many hours trying to get back websites or get into email systems, just unnecessary. So that would be the first piece of advice, I think.
Love it. Well, let's dig right in and get started with our first question. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. All right. I am the president of a small nonprofit medical clinic, and I'm also the only doctor on staff. For the last several years, we have had an executive director who was in charge of all the administration and compliance. We let him go a couple of weeks ago, and we've discovered that he didn't file our 990, and the IRS has been sending notices, and that we owe upwards of $20,000 in penalties. My treasurer also started looking at what was filed in previous years, and she found our 990s are riddled with errors. I've hired a CPA to come in and help with the 990s, but what else should we be doing? This ED handled just about everything, and I'm not sure where to start in cleaning up the mess he made and hiring a new executive director.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you're in that situation. That's tough, but just systematically work at getting yourself out of it. Usually in my experience, contacting the IRS and having a letter from the board of directors explaining the situation and asking to have the fees reversed usually works. I've seen that work a few times. I don't think that the IRS is out to get small nonprofit organizations with these huge fees. So write a letter about what happened, be honest about it, and then just wait. The IRS takes a long time. Jess, you've probably experienced that. The wait times to be on the phone, have a couple hours when you call them. And then also getting notice of having those fees reversed can take months. So, and I will say, I've also seen them take the fees right out of your bank account. That happened at one organization where I was. One day they just came and they took the fees that were owed. That organization was able to get them back, but in the meantime, it caused a bit of a cash flow issue. So beware that might happen too.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And, right now we're recording and it's been like 2 years of global pandemic, and the IRS has not weathered that storm real well. So they definitely are sending like notices that are wrong. And then even when you respond, they haven't processed your response. So they just keep sending notices and like levy notices. And it's really important that taxpayers, which is what the IRS considers the nonprofit, respond to those notices, because at some point they're going to get caught up. But if it's the first time that you've had a mess up like this, you can request an abatement of the penalties because you reasonably relied on this person and all of that. But if this is like a pattern of behavior, then the IRS is not as forgiving in my experience.
Good point.
So as long as it's like the first go around and you haven't screwed this up before, and you can kind of say you reasonably relied on the preparer or the person, and that you're taking corrective action now, that's okay. But then you also really have to be like on it and not like miss a filing next time.
Right.
I've definitely seen clients that forgot to file an extension and then got penalties and get into a bad way that way too.
The other thing that I was going to add along those lines is make sure that your other filings are up to date. So in Minnesota, we file annually with the Minnesota Secretary of State, and then also with the Attorney General. And so you want to make sure that both of those are up to date. The annual registration with Secretary of State is just an online, really simple, must do it sometime within the year. And then the annual report to the Attorney General, that one requires a board motion and a few other things, and you'll also have to submit a copy of your 990. So if you miss those for 3 years, I think it is, you will automatically have your nonprofit status revoked, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, you don't want to get your IRS status revoked because, like we just said, the IRS isn't a real easy place to work with right now. What about other stuff, though? As far as like one of the things for me in this question is that there was a lot of reliance on the ED. And what else would you recommend taking stock of to make sure the sort of like foundation of this nonprofit's house is in order?
Yeah. So I tend to do kind of an organizational assessment that looks at your key functions of a nonprofit. So looking at your finances, making sure that your board, that there's full transparency there, that your board understands the reports it's getting, and has confidence in the preparer, whether that's your bookkeeper or a treasurer, but whoever's keeping your books, that there's confidence there and transparency. Making sure that if you are grant funded, that, reports are being done on time, that you know where your money is coming from and what those requirements and stipulations are. Also, doesn't sound like, were there staff members? It didn't allude to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. But staff checking in, making sure that people are supported during a transition. If there's been a long time executive director, I think that's always a good place to start. And then just making sure that you are communicating with your constituents what's going on. And I think it's okay to put out there that you're going through a bit of a transition, as long as you're making steps to remedy whatever happened so that it doesn't happen again. And that would be the next thing. How do you make sure it never happens again? How do you make sure that the organization isn't so heavily reliant on one person? So how does the board really stand or take a stand in its responsibilities around governance, and just making sure that some of the duties are a little bit more spread out so that not one person holds everything.
Yeah, right on. Right on. All right, let's go to question 2. I am the public relations director for a college club, and we have a major turnover problem, being that people leave every few years as they graduate. Well, that makes sense. I received zero guidance on how to run things, and it took me a while to get up to speed. I'm looking for ideas to reduce the future loss of institutional knowledge, professional connections, public engagement, etc. for this organization where turnover like this is inevitable. What can I do?
Well, that's common. And I just actually was working with a group at the University of Minnesota that went through that. Every couple of years, they're changing over the leadership. It's all student run. Students have other responsibilities. So I think when I worked as an executive director of a nonprofit, a small nonprofit, we had one of our positions that we knew turned over every year. So I would just first of all assume that there's going to be annual turnover. when you know that that's coming, we all should do that. I mean, we really, people aren't staying in jobs as long as they used to. And so we really should be preparing to make sure that that person can be taken out of the situation and the organization not miss a beat. So whether that is writing down in sort of a manual, if you will, kind of the cyclical cycle of your year, whatever cyclical cycle, I'm not sure if that's right, but whatever the cycle of work is from maybe September through May, and then, maybe there's an annual conference or an annual event, and making sure that that stuff is documented and kind of who the players are. So what are the professors, or what are the teachers, or what are the key stakeholders that are involved? Where's their contact information? What are the venues that you use for your events, or who are the volunteers that you rely on? Things like that. And really making sure that all of that is documented in one place so that you can just sort of hand that figuratively to the next person and say, I'm going to go over this with you, but when all else fails, just return back to this manual, and then make sure that that new person knows that that's part of their responsibility, is to keep that up and keep that moving for the next person.
I love that advice. And I would say, for one of the things that I see people make mistakes in this area is that they have too much ownership over the standard operating procedures. So a really great tip for small nonprofit is to have an institutional account, whether that's special awesome college club at gmail.com, where you have an organizational account and you have organizational documents in a shared drive, or whether that's a Google Doc or whatever. Personally, for me at the law firm, we use a product called Tetra, which is paid, but it's basically like an online wiki. And you just go in there and you say okay, how do you run a meeting? How do you do this? How do you throw our annual conference? You can create all of your standard operating procedures in a place that everyone has access to. And this advice is going to come with a bunch of front loading, right? You're going to need everybody at the organization to do a bunch of work to get this going. But then once it's there, you can start adding to it and documenting and continuing to build that out. And one thing I like for a group like this is having the outgoing, when there's going to be turnover. First of all, part of the job description should include maintaining and updating your documentation. That's number one, right? That has to be part of the job description for your roles at the organization. And then part of the offboarding for those roles should be let's say you're the club president, you make a little video for the incoming president that says hey, here's my data dump of everything that I want to tell you that's been going on at the organization. I've been talking to this professor about this thing. We've been working with this other group on campus about this other issue. These are the 3 people that I know are leading this and will still be here next year. Just make a little video, and then you have that as a repository. You're not counting on somebody to have a phone call. Maybe they took notes, maybe they didn't. That person can go back to it over and over again. I think people that are visual learners and auditory learners are both served by leaving a video. And if you need to, you can always make a transcript.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I also loved what you said about the email and having it be institutional as opposed to just on your personal email. It keeps everything in one place. So Good advice.
Right on. All right, moving on. Our final question. I'm the board chair of a nonprofit that's been around for about 6 years, and we're outgrowing our current setup. Almost all of our board members and volunteers have been involved since the very beginning, and they're reaching the point of burnout on their work, all while we are trying to grow and scale up. I need some advice for the transition from a working board to an advisory board and to hire staff to run the day-to-day operations. We're working on bringing in the money for this, but I just can't even picture what our next steps are to get where I know we need to be to succeed. Ugh.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's the rock in the hard place right there.
And it's a good place too. Sometimes it's about giving up that I don't know if it's control or ownership. Sometimes you'll see that a lot with the founder, right? Where they've put in so much and they're really excited to get moving on the organization, but then they get to the point where they just can't handle it and they need to hire people to kind of take that over. I think in this case, it sounds like they've been around for a while and it sounds like they might have some staff, but really needing to maybe move from that generalist staff where you have an executive director who wears all of the hats of, hey, I'm the executive director, I'm the HR department, the finance department, the program person, the communications director, all of the above. And so really taking off some of those hats and specializing a bit, being clear about what your goals are, first of all, and then hiring to fit those gaps. So making sure that you have kind of an organizational chart, what skills are needed. You've got some job descriptions, and you're right. It is going to take some time, a good search. It's going to take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to find the right person and get them into place. So think about that in your planning as well. And then also, I think for the board, maybe doing some training around the role of governance as opposed to the role of day-to-day operations, and really understanding what that is. And that's an extremely important role. Governance is essential and oftentimes gets sort of put on the back burner for the day-to-day stuff. And so I think it's a real opportunity for this organization to have the board move into kind of that oversight, the making sure that there's sound policies, that they're overseeing the executive director, that they're ensuring that there are good goals and direction set, that the mission is strong, all of that governance stuff. They can move into that, let the professional staff, the executive director lead the organization. The board can help make sure that the resources are there for that executive director to be successful. But really the executive director, it's their time to shine and bring on the people that they need and to really kind of run the day-to-day operations.
Yeah. So for me, if we had a time machine, I think I would have this nonprofit go back about 12 months before, because once we're talking about everybody's burned out, that usually means everybody's really friggin' burned out. So it's like, I wish we could start this planning before it gets critical and people are like at their wits' end and like, I need to quit. I can't do this anymore. Because the time to start planning is before your board is all used up. Hindsight's 2020, but that'd be one thing if I had a magical nonprofit fairy wand and I could wave it at this nonprofit. The other thing that I run into a lot is sometimes it's really hard for the board to let go of their operational roles. And it can be fruitful to actually recruit additional board members and let some of the people who are burned out go back into more of a volunteer role, either to take a break, which is totally fine, or like they can step back into like, I want to go back to helping save the puppies and I don't want to do all this administration stuff, and letting them rekindle their passion for the organization through the thing that got them excited in the first place, which was not the paperwork. And that helps bring in fresh energy to the board. Because especially with the tiniest nonprofits, it can just be that people are just so tired of the admin.
Yeah, and that they forget to, see the forest in the trees, and they're just buried and burnt out. And why am I doing this? And the martyr too, right? You'll see those sometimes where nobody is doing anything except for me, and this can't possibly go on unless I am there. And it's like, no, really, if that's the way you built the organization, then you haven't been successful, right? Like if you've built it where you must be there, otherwise it will fail, that means you haven't built a strong nonprofit organization, because the organizations that I see that are strong have built themselves up in a way that any one person can be taken out and that the organization can still be successful.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, I think we have a bunch of good takeaways here. I definitely jotted down a few, and let me know if you think I missed anything, Amy. The first thing that jumps out to me is making sure all your filings are happening and, if not, getting caught up. That first question is, really about putting too many eggs in one basket, being a person to be in charge of everything. And there's just a lot of stuff that you have to do as a nonprofit. So create a calendar, have shared responsibility, and just make sure the stuff is happening. And then the second one that popped out to me was document the heck out of your processes. Because whether you plan for turnover or not, it's going to happen, right? You might get hit by a bus tomorrow, or you might have some medical emergency and you're not going to be there, or that's going to happen to somebody. So documentation of the roles and what is everybody's job and how do they do it will really help preserve your organizational knowledge. And it's tempting to just keep living at the end of the fire hose and triage and trying to achieve the mission and not really building systems or knowledge bases, but you do need to do that. And then I think the third one that popped out to me was really planning for board transition before it's critical and everybody's burned out and at wit's end. That last question is sort of about they're trying to grow and scale, but really baked in there is how do you transition the board? And I think the earlier you plan for that, the better off you're going to be. Anything else you think I missed?
I think that's great. And get those darn passwords.
Yes. And always know your passwords. I mean, to the institutional account, right? Those passwords should be an institutional holding anyway, and they shouldn't be somebody's personal stuff. Use password sharing, use an organizational account, be smart, have a record of those things.
And think about these things when you're setting it up. I think you alluded to that, but really it might take you a couple extra steps to set things up right on the front end, but it'll save you a ton down the road.
Amen to that. Well, Amy, thanks so much for joining me. If listeners want to connect with you and learn more about what you do, where can they find you online?
Sure. You can find me at willow-consulting.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a huge favor, share it with a friend, rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app. It really helps me out. If you have a question or a story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a note online or leave a voice memo by calling 612-208-9120. Thanks for listening. All right, folks, that's our show. Be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Jess Birkin. We want to hear from you. Send us a message at our website, charitytherapy.show. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at birkinlaw.com/signup. Charity Therapy is a production of Birkin Law Office, PLLC. Our theme song is by Whalehawk. And remember, folks, this podcast is produced for your entertainment and is not a substitute for actual legal advice.